All right, well, hello. Thanks very much for having me on. Great to talk to you, Sorcha. My name is Aron Hegarty. I'm one of the co-founders of Candlelit Tales, and we were a bit sad not to be in Galway Theatre Festival this year. So,
Yeah, well, we were sad not to have you. We've had you before, and it's always been great fun. So I'm delighted that you could join us via Zoom. It's not quite the same, but virtually has to do for now.
indeed.
So the show that you were going to present in GTF 2020 was called Conla's Wave. Can you tell me and us, the audience, a little bit about that, please?
Sure. I mean, we have been thinking about this show for quite a while, I guess. To put in context, Candlelit Tales is a storytelling company primarily, and we focus on Irish myths and legends, and we regale Irish stories to live audiences on a fairly regular basis since 2014, and have specified in kind of and looking at the Ulster cycle and the Táin, and I think it was 2016 that we brought the Shadows of the Táin to Galway Theatre Festival, and this year, because I'm an actor, a performer, a lover of movement, of choreography, of dance, as well as a storyteller and a shanachie and a blackguard and a shy talker in general. I wanted to kind of combine a lot of my interests in that and make a more dynamic theatrical performance. And Brian Burrows was really interested in developing this piece with us, and myself and a number of people. I invited a number of other actors along to workshop this idea uh, over the course of 2 years, actually. And just in November 2019, we were down in show with three performers, including Rue O'Shea on soundscaping design to showcase what we had done and scripted thus far and how the audience reacted to it. It is a story that examines, I guess, probably should have thought this through a bit better. How to pitch it again? I forgot how to pitch it. It was ages ago, right? It's a story within a story. We were creating a world where the old Shanachie and mystic and sage or druid Fintan MacBocra came into being in Ireland now and was prompted to tell us a story, essentially. And the story that is, I guess we're Irish and we're heartbreak. We're prone to heartbreak and a bit of maudling stories. The one that we wanted to examine and go at, and the one that Fintan had a bit of a bone with and wanted to tell, was the story of Cuchulain's only son. And it's a tragedy where he eventually comes to the point of fighting and therefore and then ultimately killing his own son Canla on Strand. Yeats did a version of it, and it's not been done or redone since. And we kind of wanted to have a look at it through the lens of this shapeshifter of old, Fintan MacBocra, who was the very first man that ever came to Ireland. And he's kind of lived through the ages in all of the different ways and all of the different guises, be they hawk or sparrow or wolf or hound. And he's always been here watching. And I was just fascinated with this character for a very long time, still am, and how someone like that would have seen Ireland change, develop, and have a bit of scrutiny about what we've developed in this country now and how we are, and why is it an important time to tell that story. So
Well, it sounds like good fun, and there's a lot of like really juicy stuff in there. I'm really intrigued by a lot of things actually about Candlelit Tales because storytelling is something that's so part of who we are as Irish people and how we express ourselves, but also as theatre makers, it's kind of they're the key. Storytelling is the key to what it is that we do. But myths, I think, they have such an interesting resonance in Irish life in a way that we all know a lot of, like we know a lot of the kind of more well-known myths. But what's your research process? Like, how do you find myths? It struck me
I mean,
earlier
there's a
on
couple.
today, just like, where do
Hmm.
you go to get your information?
I mean, there's an abundance of stories online. Like if you as soon as you start looking, you'll find stuff, and so much of it has been transcribed and rewritten. I mean, I think what you said there is really important. We are all storytellers, and that's the really important thing. Everybody in this nation, especially, is a storyteller. And like, you only have to be around a fireside or a kitchen table or near the kettle before you start hearing stories. And this how we communicate, it's how we learn, it's how we actually transcend as well, and kind of get above and beyond the traumas that we've dealt with, and have a chance to look back and learn from mistakes. And I think that can sound a bit highfalutin, and I almost believe myself there for a second. But I think it's important to kind of look back at the older stories. And like, the reason I've gotten so immersed in Irish myth is because, well, my sister worked with kind of a group called Bard Mythologies, who every summer have Bard training out in Clare Island, and they're a brilliant group, and they're really involved in the kind of the resurgence and keeping the Irish stories alive. And she went back and worked for a number of years on transcribing them, making them kind of accessible, not really overly highfalutin, not really too complex. And a lot of the later Gregory or even the Yeats stuff can be very dense and very hard to grasp. And then you have the other side of things, where we all know the Salmon of Knowledge, and we all know how Satanta got his name into Cuchulainn, and then we all know, well, that's it, and like, hang on, what? There's a load more stories, right? So as soon as you start looking, there's a massive iceberg that you're just like knowing the tip of. And I suppose you can. What's amazing now is like guys like Eddie Lennon and what's the other name? Eamon Kelly were brilliant Shanakees, I suppose, and storytellers of old, and they kept the tradition of just telling folk tales, and Eddie Lennon does an amazing job of keeping folk tales alive, and they were passed down word of mouth. And it's important to remember that Ogham writing was the oldest form of writing in Ireland, but Ogham writing was essentially all of the letters of the alphabet were written down, because they're all trees, they're all names of trees, like, which is great. Gas, great, like, but like, they just basically, you look at a lot of trees and go, okay, there's a yew, there's the oak, there's and then you come up with an alphabet. But it was a naming system. It wasn't writing stuff down. It was the way of passing on information was oral tradition. It was much like the Greeks, but we didn't have the culture of writing stories down as much. And so kind of around apparently, this is all kind of relatively new to me, because I'm no expert and I'm no scholar. I'm very enthusiastic about it though. And I think that's the important thing. But by the 12th century, the Lower Gawala, or the Book of Invasions, was written down, and that was one of the first times. And these are books that are written down in monasteries by monks, by young fellas a lot of the times, just transcribing stories from word of mouth. And so now you have these massive catalogues of stories that were written down religiously, quite literally, and with a bit of a religious kind of scope on it, or an Elizabethan in Lady Gregory's kind of
religious artistic license taken, maybe.
The sensitivities are a little bit different, And so then you have to start pulling the weeds apart and go, hang on, what were they really like at the time? And what's gotten lost in translation then, when between not only the oral tradition written down into Old Irish, transcribed and translated into modern Irish, translated again into modern English, translated and reimagined again from Elizabethan language and culture, and now brought forward into today. And so there's a massive reimagining of these stories that has to take place, because you and I could go out and we could both tell the same story, but what happened to three different people, and they'd all get different stories, and that's the glory of storytelling, I suppose. And any live performance is different depending on the night you go see it, even if it's scripted, and that's the kind of beauty of live storytelling, is it's never the same. And that's the frustrating thing about Irish mythology, is that there's so many dots that are not linked, and there's this whole narrative that isn't really structured very well, whereas the Greeks kind of had their pantheon, their gods, this is what happened, creation happened, and then all of these things happened, and the war happened, and blah blah blah. Whereas Irish mythology is like, bleh. And there's kind of some strands, you can kind of piece together that the Book of Invasions happened, and then the Ulster cycle happened, and the Fianna were around, and then the Kings, and they're the four cycles of Irish mythology. The Bard mythology .ie is a great source for looking into that if you're curious and you don't know what I'm on about, because they have it well laid out there. But essentially, there's a rake of stories. They're not all interconnected. They kind of do crop up. Characters like Lugh, the sun god, was Cuchulain's father, and he crops up in the old stories, and these fairies or the fae, the Tuatha Dé Danann, they come back into stories again and again, and they just crop up out of nowhere just to play mischief. And I think we all know in Ireland we have a bit of a fear of the fae or the fairies. They're not the Tinkerbell that we have in Disney, you know. And so we're all a little bit more kind of aware that we shouldn't be knocking down the hawthorn trees or digging up the stone circles, and those places have a significance in the landscape. And as I always say, it's a quote from I don't know who, the land remembers, the land retains, and yeah, what was that again? I'll think of his name.
So you mentioned that the Ulster cycle is what you tend to focus on in Candlelit Tales. What is the draw specifically to that cycle? Like why the Ulster cycle?
I suppose, like, as this is, I'm the younger sibling of two halves of Candle Tales. Sorcha, my sister, the co-founder of Candle Tales as well. She read voraciously, and she would have read an awful lot of myths, and she kind of fell in love with Cuchulainn and this, kind of shy, introverted, pale, beautiful boy with the saddest eyes in Ireland, like, oh, would you not swoon yourself? It's the sad eyes. It's always the sad eyes.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like there's an obvious answer in that it's the most well documented set of stories. Like if you look at Kinsella's Thon is one of the most widely known ones. There's loads of other ones that I can't think of right now, but there's an awful lot of stories about Queen Maeve, the bull, and Anton Bo Cúailnge, the Cattle of Cooley, and that was kind of what we started with in 2014. And I had to learn the stories to tell them, and sure I still did. We all have to learn our scripts to be able to perform them, but it was an amazing kind of jump into my own culture without growing up with them necessarily. I grew up with a father who's basically a storyteller. He's not a shanachie, he's not a folktale teller, he's a psychotherapist, and he tells stories of an educational value. And he told me kind of fairy tales or imagined stories of Strongbow running across the plains of America that he was making up out of his head, like, as a kid. And so I had a huge appetite for stories spoken to me, but then I kind of fell in love with our stories and our set of stories. And the easy answer to come back to your question is we stuck with the Ulster cycle because Cuchulainn is such a giant figure in Irish myth. There's the most amount of detail about the Crave Rua, the Red Branch. There's more details of the characters in that story. Queen Maeve is such a brilliant character, and we're talking about a lack of female characters. She's amazing, and the thing she did not give a flying feck. And she went ahead, and oftentimes, one of my critiques of Kinsella would be like he kind of villainizes her oftentimes and makes her the bad guy of the story, and like that's not true once you start digging up and looking at it. And I suppose it was the most accessible story to start with, and set of stories to start with. And once we started pulling apart, we realised, whoa, there's loads more to kind of go into, more characters, more stories, and more príomh scéalta, more background stories to the Táin itself and that one particular epic. And it's kind of like the Odyssey, it just goes on, and there's just so many little avenues to go down. But then as soon as you kind of look at that, you go, oh, there's the Fianna cycle at the moment, and that we're looking at the moment a lot. And then there's the King cycle, and sure, there's the Book of Invasions, and we've hopped around since 2014 and a lot, like in between all the cycles, and played around with different ways of telling those stories. And I suppose our first attempt into doing kind of a theatrical performance was doing we got a residency down in Shawbrook, and did a a kind of a dance choreographed piece, set to music with the story of Lugh, the sun god of the Tuatha De Danann from the Book of Invasions. And it was a beautifully kind of crafted piece, if I do say so myself. But it was a good proof examination of how far and how much you can play with these stories, because it's endless as far as I'm concerned. You know, it just it keeps on. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Like, you know.
So you mentioned the Tuatha De Danann and characters that crop up causing mischief. And you also mentioned your own enthusiasm just there for all of this work, which would be two words that I would find quite apt to describe the experience of seeing a Candlelit Tales performance. There's a little sense of mischief in even how you approach the stories. I think there's a joy in it, there's an enthusiasm in it that comes out through the music and the telling of the stories. Do you find that that's different, like that the response to that and the response to the performances is different between a theatre setting and a pub-like setting?
Interestingly, yes. Like, and I haven't been able to put my finger on why exactly. I think it's because I think there's an onus on an audience member in the theatre, and I love theatre. Like, I work in theatre. I was just working in theatre before COVID hit, you know, and I was, and I, and there, but it does feel like a little different, you know, bit of a ball game, because I guess you go into the theatre, and as an audience member, you take on the role of sitting back, observing, accepting, believing, and you have to take that into your kind of as your onus, I suppose, and you go in and go, okay, I believe these characters are these in this world, and go for it. In different settings, and we, you know, depending on whether we're performing in festivals, in reading rooms, and in libraries, in like in pubs. We were in the Crane Bar in Galway Theatre Festival in 2018, and that was beautiful. But like we would perform in a Harbour Bar on a monthly basis. We started off in Stag's Head in Dublin, and it was a case that people could rock up. I'd be standing there, you know, telling people there's no room in here, please, you know, on the, you know, queue outside or whatever, and or people would sit on seats or sit on the floor, and like then we know we're in it together, and it's like, right, I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing. You're all here. I'm going to tell you a story, and it's kind of like, I don't want to compare it to karaoke because that's the worst thing of all time. But you know, the way people are kind of, and I kind of have a bit, I kind of both hate and love karaoke in that, like it sounds awful, but also when you're there, you're like, go on, you legend, because you're in it to help someone out with it. You know, you're kind of, you want it to go that way, and I suppose that's kind of the mixture between live improv, you know, sometimes comedy, because some of the stories are ridiculous, and you're like, you know, this actually happened. Like, you know, Queen Maeve had, you know, only married Ailill because she had one lover waiting outside the door. She'd only accept a lad as long as 7 lads were outside the door, and she looked to 27 men to satisfy her in one day. Or Fergus McRoy, who was, you know, apparently had a very big sword. I mean, that's the stuff that's written down. Like, I don't make this shit up, you know. And so it's kind of like, you know, yourself, you say that kind of stuff to a room full of people, and it's just, it brings you together in the moment of laughter. And then amazingly, you just have this huge heart opening thing that you get it in theatre, and like, I think you have to work a lot harder at people in theatre, because you have to beat down a wall of persecution and kind of analysing and skepticism, and kind of people sitting back there writing their reviews in their own head and taking their own notes, and disbelief, and wanting to disbelieve unless you really impress them. And I guess when you strip all that away and you go, look, we're in this together. You can enjoy it if you want to. We're here to tell a story. The music starts, the drum starts, you know, people are sitting there, the atmosphere is alive, it's vibrant, and we're going to tell you a story. It might be a bit of a funny one, might crack a joke, and all of a sudden you tell the children a leer, or you tell a story that just is heartbreaking, and suddenly just poof, you melt inside. And, you know, Cuchulainn and Ferdia was the first experience I had of that, of like two friends having to fight each other because the greater good told them to. And we don't have this ability, you know, all the time to see our own human nature reflected in art. and you know, you see a painting on a wall and you can be a bit distant from it, you can appreciate the beauty of it. But sometimes when art is done right, it manages to transcend the beauty and the craft of what is being made and just attack, and I mean attack in a visceral sense, the emotive body, to just jump out of you, and you experience something, and it reconnects you with a feeling that you forgot you had, and you don't even know why you're bubbling or why you're blistering or why you're shivering, but it brings you out of your cognitive, heavy, overthinking body, mind, and brings you right into the physical, feeling body, and that's the power of art, and that's the power
Oh,
of
I'm getting
story.
goosebumps just thinking about it.
But that's the
Oh,
power of it.
yeah.
Like, and you lift people out. And you know, one of the most beautiful things I heard someone say to me after a gig in Whelan's was like, Christ, I forgot what it was to be human for a while. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, that was important. You know, and that's important. And like a million different ways of creating art and creating that feeling. But for everyone, it's worthwhile. You know,
Mm.
so. What
God,
was your question?
it just reminds you of the of everything that we're missing. Do you know, I find that I go through moments of thinking, it's fine, I've got this, it's grand, it's fine, doesn't matter. And then I am, you know, a description like that of the experience of whether it's sitting in a pub at a gig, or in a theater at a play, or whatever it is. There's so many moments through the past year, even, or 2 years, where I've been completely taken out of myself, to the point where you can't even remember practically who you are. If someone were to ask you your name in that moment, you just wouldn't even know. And I think there's going to be a huge need for that whenever social distancing, etc., allows. Then there is something in us that needs expression through more than the words that we have at our own disposal.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I'm both sad for all that we have missed, but also excited for how the artists of Ireland and the world, but particularly Ireland, are going to grasp the idea of grief and pain and difficulty, and just transform it into something really powerful.
I think that's a really important thing to latch onto, is like we are going to go through a grieving.
Hmm.
You know, we're going through it. A lot of people have died. We've not been able to mourn them properly. It's a really difficult thing to understand, and there's a lot of stuff being kind of buried down deep and put away in boxes, and like that shit comes out, has to come out. And if it come out on a hurling field, great, get the GA back as soon as possible, you know, for lads and women,
Yeah.
and to run around, and that's a form of expression, you know. And so much of the form of expression that I grew up with was GA and hurling, and that's kind of like in my bones, so to speak, in that I want to get out there and live it. And when you're confined and that sense of connection is removed, yeah, we're missing it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and I'm looking
Mm.
forward to being in a room of people that are feeling the same feeling, are imagining the same things, and are listening to the same thing that I'm listening to, and we're all in a similar imaginative space that is going through something that can help us grieve out of this time,
Mm.
because we're going to need some stuff to grieve through, because we don't want to put it in a box and put it away and just hide it for generations
Mm.
after us to be dealing with and unpacking, like we did with the famine, or had to do with the famine. You know, like we're still unpacking that, and so many of the traumas that are in the land. Moriarty, there you go. Subconscious, well done. Moriarty has that beautiful interview with Tommy Tiernan on YouTube. Look it up. It's fantastic, where he asks him like what it is about the land, and Moriarty said, "Oh, well, when you walk through the land, you might hit a spot that feels sad because
Mm.
something happened there, you know." And like, you know, the land remembers, the land retains, and you're just, the one good thing about this lockdown, and I'll say it's probably the only one good thing, is I've gotten more in touch with nature, in watching it and seeing it and being out in it, and in breathing it and putting my feet in soil and putting my feet in grass and grounding myself and hugging trees. Yes, I hug trees. If you don't, there's something wrong with you. You know, and like, but like I've got that chance to go back and just look and slow down and really experience nature, and that's something I want to keep and hold on to, even though when I come out of this, I want to bring it with me into
Mhm.
some form of whatever it is that we start making after this, because I'm so curious, and like it's amazing to see so many artists going online, sharing music, sharing theater, sharing stories, sharing what they
Mhm.
can, and it's beautiful because it's showing that we're separated, we're still together. Like it's not. I think the whole lockdown, the social isolation, was it the wrong name to put on it? It's physical isolation, but social connectivity, because we
Mhm.
have to stay connected, and like hopefully as we keep on going through and the restrictions get gradually lifted, and we're cautious about this, we can keep that idea of connecting emotively throughout this nation and throughout the world, as we're kind of showing now as well, that we have to and we can do, and we can connect with each other through art and through so many means. But the platforms are changing, and the goalposts did change, so now we're having to scratch our heads and find out, instead of sitting down on each other's toes in a bar with the pints flowing, we have to figure out something else to open our hearts and get into that space.
Yeah,
It's
you're right.
bit of
There's been a huge generosity, like kind of nationwide, but I found particularly with artists, there was in the initial lockdown, and then there was this huge outpouring of generosity, of spirit and work, and it was very uplifting because it shows the determination, like we're not going anywhere. Um, and there's always some good to be found if you kind of know where to look for it. Tell
absolutely.
me about what Candlelit Tales are doing at the moment and how you're dealing as a theatre company with the lockdown and all of that
Yeah.
that brings with it.
I mean, like it's really tricky. I mean, like I'm kind of always. I mean, I'm always slightly hesitant to call ourselves a theatre company, because I think three applications that I did for Galway Theatre Festival were the three that we ended up in. But applications are not my strong suit. I think, like, to be a rigid, honest to God, hard working theatre company, you've got to be on that stuff, and that's where I class ourselves slightly beside that, and we create as much as we can, and we put it out as much as we can do as well. And we've always been like, these aren't our stories, these are shared stories. And what we're trying to do now, I guess, like we're so heavily involved in the live performance, and have been, and we've kind of managed kind of two big theatre shows, and one was a puppetry show, in collaboration with Marie Denham of Flight of Fancy in Dublin, and the other was a dance theatre show, and the latest kind of next attempt to make it our next theatre outlet, I suppose, was Conla's Wave, which was going to be kind of a really solid world within a world, and using physicality, using dance and shadow, and a lot of the stuff we'd really kind of played with and gotten our grips with. But without venues to do that with right now, what we're focusing on is a podcast, and our podcast is the Candlelit Tales podcast, and we've been doing that for over a year through high demand. I guess we're just like, all right, cool, sit down, tell a story. It was different straight away. I knew it was different. Like, it was like, this is not the same. It's a different medium. You don't get that reaction from people, so the story can't necessarily evolve in a natural dynamic the way it will in a live show. And that's where you really know you're in flow, where you hit that kind of beautiful way of getting into the story, getting into music, and getting into the atmosphere of the room, when you tell two of the same stories in two different places, and they're totally different, but they still work nonetheless. And I guess what we're trying to do now is play with. We never really had an epic for the Fianna like we did for the Ulster Cycle, and we came across. My girlfriend gave me the Battle of Entry, a book, Asquelga, and in English, page for page, and I was just looking at it, going, "This is an amazing story." And so it's just the king of the world invades Ireland, and the Fianna have to stand up, and it lasts for a year and a day, and there's just so much stuff, so many little chapters happen that we had to go through it, trying to cut out the stuff, and playing with Foley, playing with sound, playing with what we've been doing in lockdown. Luckily, I live with Roche, a kind of a, I guess he's a sound engineer, playmaster, gong guru. I don't know what you want to call him. And he's been playing with a lot of Foley sound for Candlelit Tales for Kids, which is a kind of a series we release on YouTube, which is a drive that I have to, animate and enthuse younger audiences, younger kids into Irish myth. It's not just the stuff that's in books, because I think unless you have a great teacher, and I know a lot of brilliant primary school teachers out there that are reading those stories and animating them brilliantly, bring them to life. But I wanted to, from this isolation, have a series for kids that was done short, nice and snippy, but also have animated voices, the stuff we do in live shows for kids, the stuff that I learnt off Louis Lovett and Barnstorm, and I loved seeing in Barbaro and Galway, the what kids really love, and so I really enjoyed doing that, and that was kind of brought us into looking at this epic, The Battle of Entry, and playing it more like a radio theatre show. And that's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of work. We've episode 1 pretty much done now. Episode 2 close to, and episode 3 is turning into episode 3 and 4. Not so great at the cutting. But no, we've been looking at this as like, okay, let's change it up. Let's mix our media. Let's try and get really good at what we're doing and buy a bit of equipment. We have a Patreon page, and we're very lucky to be supported by our patrons that love Irish mythology. It's patreon.com/Candlelit Tales, if you want to know.
There, yeah.
But we've been able to buy a little bit of equipment to be able to each have a home recorder, and so we have kind of a home studio where we can get that stuff done and then mix it in the ether and send it to each other, and a lot of Zoom calls like these and Zoom rehearsals, which is weird, but we're getting there. We've learned how to do it, and we're excited to be releasing some stuff online and more stuff online. But I'm really seriously looking out the sky at a blue sky and kind of going, God, I want to be out there somewhere telling stories to a live audience sometime sooner rather than later. So hopefully that will be the case.
Well, hopefully indeed. It's been lovely to chat to you, Aron. And hopefully we'll be able to see Conla's Wave in a physical format, hopefully in Galway soon. And I'm looking forward to seeing episode 1 through 4 and however many you come up with of the new work. So thanks very much for the chat.
Thanks a million, Sorcha. Delighted. And fair play for doing all this. I'm really enjoying all the videos. So thank you.